What is the structure of the soul and the structure of consciousness? And what are they made of?
Here, look, before I go into practice, I need to ask you something. What do you understand by the soul? Because we run into terms. Yes, so what do you understand by consciousness and by the soul? I'll start from that and then I'll review it. Because there are too many different descriptions on this topic in different schools.
The soul is within me. I live. I and the soul departs. That lives within me, that came from somewhere and ended up in me, and now it exists within me. And as time goes by, I live, then I die, and the soul just flies away. For example, to heaven or say, to hell. And so time goes by, I live, then I die, and the soul just flies away. Well, for example, to heaven or for example, to hell.
Well, like the spirit, yes, as it's sometimes called. Okay? And consciousness is your earthly perception of yourself, not including that very thing, right?
Yes. So there is my soul, which is something inside me, and there is consciousness, which is essentially what I project myself from. That's how I can put it.
All right, let's go. I will need some time to prepare, as always. Some time to prepare. Those who have been watching my videos for a while have already seen this process, but here, you'll have to be a little patient. Look, when I come in, I will need you to repeat it to me again. I need to repeat the questions. Again, because I completely forget them. So, once again, what's the difference between consciousness and the soul, right? Was that how it sounded?
What is the structure of the soul and the structure of consciousness, and what are they made of?
Consciousness. When I tune into consciousness, when I tune into something through the higher self, at first I connect with the higher self and then it feels like diving into the ocean. So you dove in, looked at something, then surfaced and described it in words. Dove in again, looked at something, then surfaced. Describing it in words is the most difficult part. When I dive into the topic of consciousness, the first thing I see a certain sensation, a feeling, a kind of dimensionality, that's what you could call it. A certain dimensionality that consists of, it's definitely not homogeneous. So it's not like an apple or a pear, right? And there it's an apple and a pear, not homogeneous. So it's still a very heterogeneous structure. By the way, I can't say that there are clear boundaries, that here one thing starts and there another continues. No. By the way, it's not in the physical dimension. By the way, this is very interesting. I'm talking about this. And this moment I hadn't seen before. It's not a physical dimension. It's really something more subtle. How is it commonly explained in esotericism? What is there? We have a physical body, an etheric body, an astral body, and a mental body. So consciousness really doesn't relate to physical space. It's absolutely certain. So it's something deeper. I would say it like this. It has some elements of the physical. But at the same time, something very subtle is already starting to emerge. So it's like something that is on the border between the physical and the non-physical. So, let's move on. First of all, it's more multidimensional than I used to think. It's multidimensional. It really goes beyond the boundaries of physics. It seems like at its beginning it slightly touches on physics, but then it goes deeper, somewhere in that direction. It's very complex in the sense that it's going to be extremely difficult for me to break it down right now. Because it's not just, an apple or a pear. Yes, it's very, I feel the streams that intertwine like this.
Do they have color?
Color is a very physical parameter. The very concept of color is a very physical parameter. There. Don't see that it's directly. I can't say that it has a specific color. I rather feel just a certain charge that consciousness possesses in general, with a huge multidimensionality of different charges that intertwine with each other. And it's not like a layered cake. It's not exactly that. It's more like there's not a clear first layer, second, third, fourth. They somehow blend into each other. It's really strange, actually. So there's the first layer, the second, the third, the fourth. They somehow blend into each other. It's very strange, actually. One state flows into another. And somehow together they form a kind of unified, universe or something like that. Yes, a kind of universe. So I suspect it's just because of the effect of multidimensionality. So yes, we're still trying to interpret it with our physical minds. But consciousness is a really powerful thing that gets filled with experience. It's not static, so what I see is that it's not a static story. It constantly spins, it fills up somehow, meaning it grows with something. Something leaves it, by the way. Something comes in, something leaves, something settles. Consciousness is a multidimensional living structure that lies beyond the boundaries of physics, but at the same time, it hasn't yet come into contact with something that lies beyond it. Phew, it's a bit tough. Yes, that's good. Like this. It's like this. So that I don't go off on a monologue right now. I can really get into a monologue and that's it. Come on, ask me some guiding questions.
But were you looking at the consciousness of a specific person right now, or in the sense of people in general? Or were you talking about consciousness in general, like something common?
Like something common? Yes. Like roughly speaking, what is a head, or what is an arm, or what is a leg? So it's like some kind of common thing, a part of us as a human species, and specifically human consciousness. I'm looking...
Well, I got curious probably about some simple questions, but the consciousness of each person can look different, right? Well, it's interesting conditionally, but can you see what my consciousness looks like? Or can you see what the operator's consciousness looks like, for example, yours? Is there any difference between them? Like this.
Come on, this will be interesting. This will be interesting. Now let's go. Let's try. For example, conditionally the consciousness of Sergei as some kind of image that I feel will conditionally place it on the right hand. And the consciousness of Alexei, I think. Alexei won't mind if we just compare a little bit. Just a little. Listen, no, these are different shades, different, absolutely. Well, look, how would you describe this, Now I'll come up from there just to somehow structure this with words. If you take 2 avocados, yes, they still look like avocados. They visually look the same. Well, they're green with skin, yes, but in terms of taste, if you eat them, they're still a bit different. In terms of consistency, don't know. In terms of ripeness, in terms of some other factors. In terms of parameters, by the overall impression, they will still be different. It's the same here. So the consciousness of people is kind of like a universe. Well, that's not for nothing. Many people say that inside each person there is a universe. It's true, it is indeed perceived. It's exactly like a kind of universe, a multidimensional one, with some kind of transitions. But everyone has their own unique universe. A slightly different taste, not so much in color, but in the different sensations you get from it. I can't really interpret it directly. It's just different. It's hard for me to describe in words, but it's different. So, this is Sergei's consciousness. There is one kind of beauty there. And here is the consciousness, yes, of Alexei, the operator. There is a different kind of beauty there. It's beautiful here and there, but just beautiful in different ways. Well, there is a difference. 1,000%. So, there's a difference of 1,000,000%, right? With different blocks, with different setups, with different pros and cons. But again, it's still both beautiful. Because this is also interesting. By the way, when I tap into consciousness, I feel a certain divinity in that consciousness. So, one could assume that divinity is in the higher realm, in the spirit. But no, it's both in consciousness and even in the physical body. This is such a phenomenon, actually, of tapping into the higher self. If you really dive deep into the higher self, I've tried to do that deeply just now, you start to see divinity in absolutely everything. So I have books lying here on the table, in these books, in the computer, in the physical body, and in consciousness too. There is a lot of divinity in consciousness. Here. So, maybe a little bit like this. It sounds a bit pathetic, a little romantic, but it's a really strong divine energy that appears as human consciousness, with each person having their own unique beauty.
And what if we go further into the structure of the soul?
So, the soul. It's spirit, right? So we're looking at the immortal part. Well, first of all, the first thing I feel is this immediate change in frequencies. How is this perceived? If you take a measuring tape, lay it out, not really a ruler, but more like a tape measure, stretching it from A to B, then physics will feel more like something dense. Consciousness is like something in between physics. And these higher frequencies, moreover, each frequency, for example, physics, the physical body has a kind of special sound. Again, described in words, and in fact much, that you feel in the highest. It is extremely difficult for me to describe it in words. But in physics, there's a certain sound that feels quite, I don't know, again, how to describe it, a dense sound. Consciousness has an interesting quality. It's really unusual. It's a kind of shade, something similar to the work of those who have worked with a psychologist. Many psychologists have this. It's like a special aura, I guess. When you look at them, you understand that this is a psychologist, that this is a person who has developed quite well. It's such a special aura. It's like when you look directly at them, you realize that this is a psychologist, that this is a person who has developed quite well. It's exactly the mental, this somewhat astral mental, more mental, yes, the mental layer of oneself. It has a similar, a special, unique sound. When I switch to the energy of the spirit, first of all, it feels like it doesn't quite belong to this world. That's the first thing that is felt. It is present here, but very limited. Very limited. By the way, this is also an interesting view. If we talk about the energy of the spirit as pure spirit energy, and not diluted in every little cell of everything, specifically its pure, concentrated essence in the illusion of space and time, then yes, this energy is not here. It exists more over there. That's also interesting. Then, yes, this is an energy that is not here. It exists more over there. That's so interesting. Right now, I'm consciously throwing out all concepts and looking at things from scratch, and that's how it goes. So, the energy of the spirit is more like a kind of mothership that exists over there, and here it comes down like a little ray, a tiny ray, and this tiny ray of energy is just enough. It's enough for the physics to function here, for consciousness to function here. But at the same time, the main part lies beyond the boundaries of this world, and it doesn't belong to this world, specifically this physical world. In order for physics to function here, for consciousness to function here, but at the same time, the main part, it lies beyond the border of this world, and it does not belong to this world. Specifically, this physical world. That's interesting. Now, let's take a look at the structure. I have this feeling that when I look at consciousness, it's like a little micro-universe. A micro-universe, yes. But when you tap into the spirit, it's like a macro-universe in its purest form. It's this feeling of something so vast, global, and also very multidimensional, but in a different way. If we take the multidimensionality of consciousness, it seems to be limited, limited by certain frequencies. It doesn't go beyond these frequencies. So there is still a sense of boundaries. It feels like it's limited, limited by certain frequencies. It doesn't go beyond these frequencies. So there is still a sense of boundaries there. So right here, when we tap into the spirit, I don't see any boundaries at all. So the spirit absolutely expands to the right, to the left, up and down, and even at some point, I feel like there are no tops, no rights, and no bottoms there. There's nothing at all. So if I'm trying to break down the structure of the spirit, I perceive it as complete. It's impossible to describe it in words. So it's huge, huge. It's just a very, very beautiful, immense, eternal energy that simply spreads to the right. And I don't see it. I actually feel it right now. It's very multifaceted. At some point, by the way, it flows into this feeling of others. So, yeah, I've kind of emerged from that a bit. These concepts, yes, that everything is one is everything, that we are all united. At some point, this feeling really seems to, it seems to start in one of its own dimensions without losing its individuality, capturing the dimensions of others. People, too. And at some point, it's a kind of unified overall structure where each little cell has its own individuality. But at the same time, it is some much larger mechanism, a larger organism, even more so, not a mechanism, but specifically an organism. Maybe some guiding questions. So, what's here at this level? I'm going to get lost right now, because the mind, it's very difficult to describe with the mind.
I can just share with you what I contemplated deeply about when you were talking about the spirit, just a little bit more. I once recorded an interview with a girl. She works with the Akashic Records. and she described it as something, she sees it like a grid or a crystal, whatever you want to call it. And that the soul is like an impulse that separates from this something. Well, it flies away here, and then it enters the body. And when a person lives, they experience life, gaining experience. And when they die, that impulse flies back into this network, into this crystal, into something, gains experience. And when they die, that impulse flies back into this network, into this crystal, into something. So it's not about heaven, but rather about the spirit as a certain impulse here, in this network, in this crystal, in something. So it's not about heaven, but rather about the spirit as a certain impulse.
Yes, it seems like that. It seems very similar, because that's the first thing I saw, and that's exactly what I described. What is there? Like this hypothetical mothership, it can be called a crystal or something else. You see, really has many facets. Exactly, if you try to interpret it with words, it seems like there are here are some facets of intertwining. It's not just, again, layer by layer. It's a very, very multidimensional structure. So, basically, I guess you could describe it, if we use earthly words, as something like a crystal. And from there, this little ray really comes down right here. That's what is visible. And then this crystal and this little ray can already be called by different names. You can call it spirit and soul, you can call it, I don't know, some mother energy and soul or something else. That's not the point, really. That's exactly the picture itself. Yes, I completely agree. It's a kind of overall, large, multidimensional, pure structure that sends down a certain branch that comes right here. But it is indeed very small compared to this structure. The structure, if you compare it, is very small. It's really like a tiny ray from the sun, but at the same time, there's a huge, huge sun there. It's multidimensional, and you can dive into it deeper, 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 deeper. I call it, it's kind of like diving. So when you engage in practices like that, you kind of dive in, right? An ocean in this. So I always perceive the space of this mother energy of spirit as an ocean, vast, deep, mysterious, profound, boundless, and infinite, rather. This is exactly my pure perception. I kind of dive into it. I dive into it and then come up for air. I dive into it and come up for air. And the longer you practice these things, the deeper you dive into it. And more beauty from all this beautiful, this multidimensional, practically indescribable with words. You observe from there. Well, that's kind of how it is, yeah.
Is it possible to somehow understand or describe what you just described? Well, something that is dimensionless, where is it located? And does it even exist? Somewhere?
This, again, if we take it, a purely mental concept that there is a physical world, an etheric world, an astral world, and a mental world, including for our planet. So, there is the astral plane of the earth, the etheric plane of the earth, and the mental plane of the earth. It's beyond all of this. This is beyond any physics, any astral, any mental. This is space. It's exactly the vibrations of the spirit. It is located in the space of the vibrations of the spirit, however that may sound. So let the guys who structure this into a comprehensible mental concept come up with the terms. On the level of practice, it's a special, very, very distant space from our world, which is felt as a space of these high energies and vibrations. Spirit.
When I asked the question about the soul, you said that the spirit is something immortal. So, based on this, as I understand it, does consciousness have an end? So, if the spirit is something immortal, then what happens to my consciousness when I die? At that moment, does the light just turn off?
When consciousness dies. When consciousness dies, right now, let's put it this way. When the physical body dies, what happens to consciousness? By the way, it's an interesting process. Right now, I want to double check. No, the light bulb doesn't turn off. That's interesting. It feels like kind of, right now, I'll try to describe it somehow with words. You know what it resembles? Very primitive. So, there's a caterpillar that lives there. Yeah, in its own, well, in its form as a caterpillar. Then it goes through the stage of transition, transforming from a caterpillar into a butterfly. And this process, it reminds me of that stage the physical body dies, and this inner universe transforms like a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly, transforms into pure experience. Well, again, I feel like this is very, in a way, very primitive, but rather into some kind of experience. Just a second. I want to check this. What happens to consciousness after death? It's specifically about human consciousness. Yeah. Experience, just experience. So it's like, the energy becomes less dense. It just becomes energy. Experience, the energy of experience. And this energy of experience, it then transitions into, it becomes some other kind. So, that old form, it disintegrates along with the physical body, but the charge, the energy itself, it transitions into something like a wave. Like a wave, it's some kind of interesting wave transmission as I see it. It's like, the sound that just travels in a wave, settling down. It's very similar, settling down, perhaps, in some, using a bit of a concept to make it clear, settling down as if in some storage, in some kind of data storage, in some informational databases, well, roughly speaking, in the ether, in the astral, and in the mental body. So, yes, consciousness, which is essentially a combination of the etheric, astral, and mental bodies, mostly the mental one, but with slight elements of the ether and the astral that are involved in this process. This might be a separate topic to discuss. It seems to fly by and settle in all the storage of this level. So, in the same Akashic records, in some global branches, I don't know. In this power, in the storage of this earth, and on top of that, in the spirit, in the dream, to which this consciousness belonged at some point. So, you see, it fills the spirit with this experience of the lived life. And at the same time, it leaves an imprint in it and is transmitted to the spirit and remains in the mental field, primarily in the mental field of the planet, in those zones where experience usually remains in the mental field of our planet. And that's why, by the way, you can perceive what a person was like, for example, from the mental field, just from those databases, on one hand. Or you can touch their spirit and just communicate with them. So it's like, it's like you printed a book, right? You printed a book and you sent it to K. As per our law, we sent it to the library. In this, there are different ones. I sent the funds there, yeah, and also put some in the stores. It's the same thing here. This experience leaves an imprint like sound wave that passes after death, like a scream, yes, and it remains. It remains everywhere. It stays in the field of the planet and in the field of the universe, which, because the planet is part of the universe, touches and reaches the spirit, naturally, because it's his experience that he lived through. Something like that. I feel something similar. I could use more beautiful, correct, and clear words, but right now I probably won't be able to.
Dear friends, I invite you all to my course with a personal vision, Return to the True Self. This course has been around for over 12 years. And recently we launched it in English with my complete personal vision in 6 modules, working with blocks, working with egregores, working with the ego, contacting the higher self. Answers to simple questions, answers to more complex questions, and then there's what we call the Great Journey. It's contact with space, contact with the planet, contact with God, contact with anything at your request through the higher self. Health, finances, relationships, purpose, past life. The course is available at any time. You can sign up for it using the link below this video. Come on over, I'll be waiting for you.